So I wanted to start with a quote, a couple of quotes actually. The government must act, but the people can also decide. And I am convinced that the people will no longer let the government do nothing or do the wrong thing. And this is Rachel Carson, who wrote Silent Spring. And I really want to underscore, a lot of people have drawn parallels between the issues with DDT and pesticides with what we're dealing with now with anticoagulants, and they cite Silent Spring and the influence it had on banning DDT. But I want to underscore that it took an entire decade after Silent Spring was published and the outcry from that for there to become for a federal ban to pass. So this stuff still takes time, even when you have a huge consensus, like in this case, a best-selling book where a lot of people were clued into what the issue was and active. It still took a decade. So we need to have patience a lot of times on this political front. And here's a quote from someone more contemporary, Lisa Owens-Viani of Raptors Are the Solution. Raptors Are the Solution worked to get a state ban on anticoagulants, first the second generations, and it's the only state so far that has banned these. So she wrote this to me during like an interview I was doing with her. We needed a top-down solution, a law starting at the state level to really reduce widespread wildlife poisonings. It was a slow and frustrating process, but it was worth it. Affecting real and lasting change is long-haul work, and it takes a lot of dedication. So with that in mind, we now have a bill. Sorry, I have to admit more people, which I can't do when I have my thing up. Sorry, I have to admit some people, and I can't do that for some reason. Okay, so back to the slideshow. So the Hawkins bill was filed very recently. It's bill number 1721. This is the first bill that's been filed in the State House that would prohibit anticoagulant rodenticide poisonings. And it also targets both first and second generation anticoagulants. There are also some other state bills that are worth our attention. There's one that would return the ability to ban these poisons on the local level. There's another one that would actually take the authority from the pesticide board and put it with the Department of Environmental Protection, which might benefit us as well. But the Hawkins bill is the one that I think deserves the most focus. And what I want to address is the way to really start pushing on these levers to get these bills more consideration. The first thing is we really need to ask our legislators to co-sponsor this bill. And the thing I want to address is that phone calls or virtual or in-person meetings are really the most effective ways to do that. I'm not trying to say that you should never email your representative or House rep or senator. It's just that they get so many emails, they are not going to pay attention to that. And as someone who's worked for political offices behind the scenes, I know that it actually very much impresses them if they feel like, wow, this issue is so important to this person that they took the time to call and speak to our legislative staff. That's going to make a lot more of an impression if they start getting multiple phone calls. If you get a voicemail, I mean, it's good to leave a message, but it's even better to keep trying until you can speak to legislative staff. Better yet is many of your legislators have usually monthly constituent meetings where they'll host a Zoom, or they'll have it at their local library or cafe in their district. Going to one of those and bringing even maybe several of your friends or family from the area who's also in their district can also make a huge impression. So I would really say, as we're working on trying to get co-sponsors or getting your legislators to pay attention to the Hawkins and other bills, to make those efforts if you can, and also ask your other friends and family in Massachusetts, because it really can't be just concentrated in the Boston metro area, to also do the same if they can. It will come up in the Environmental Committee first, the Environmental and Natural Resources Committee. And so another thing you'd want to do is write that committee before or around the week of the hearing. And sometimes there's a little time afterwards too, a couple of weeks where you can still write them. Again, when you submit any kind of email to a committee, you want to make that really personal. I've noticed that a lot of times people will ask for a script and they'll copy and paste that script. And again, I've worked behind the scenes. These actually get flagged or tagged by staff as like duplicates. And sometimes it's even like sometimes categorized as spam. They don't pay as much attention if they're noticing like that it's canned text that's been copied and pasted. They look for personal emails with, even if it's your own anecdotes, that's going to be a lot more effective than say a canned email with just like data being cited that they've noticed came from some kind of script that some organization formulated. So if you even write a paragraph or two that's heartfelt where you talk about losing a pet or a family member that lost a pet to rat poisoning, or having a nest of hawks in your neighborhood that you believe died of rat poisoning, that's going to make a lot more impression than anything else. So please get those letters into the committee, and you can still use data points. I think it's important to put those in somewhere, but what really is going to fuel that is that these people are paying attention to if people are personally impacted and are feeling strongly enough to really push their legislators and even vote them out if they don't want to move the dial on this issue. The other big thing is to get organizations to write letters to the Environmental Committee. If you are part of any kind of group or organization, whether it's a Save Wildlife chapter, a Friends of group, any green group, any public health group, any animal welfare group, if you do dog rescue or cat rescue or volunteer in that, if you can get those folks to write letters, I know that actually seeing organizations submit letters can also go a long way. I got about 20 organizations to submit letters to our home rule petition when it was in committee, and home rule petitions almost never make it out of committee, and ours did last year. And I think it was because we had all those organizations submit letters. Also, if there is a State House event, please plan one. Please attend it if you can. And I know that's a big ask, but getting numbers at those rallies or events can matter. And if you can't consider, or if you're too far away from the State House, consider planning or attending one in the home district where you live. So say if you're in Western Mass, you can maybe plan a rally in that district. And then obviously you want to follow up with your legislators when these are coming up for a vote, but not too much. You don't want to, you don't want to harangue them every week, because then again, they can kind of turn off to this issue. You want to wait till it's like critical times. When is it coming up for a vote? When is it coming up on the floor? When is it being heard? And that's when you want to ping them again. And again, you want to call them. You don't want to just email them. For some reason, this isn't moving. Okay, so also I wanted to talk about some ways to support our legal petition. As people know, we have a legal petition that's been submitted to from Harvard University as our counsel to the pesticide board of the state. And we're asking them to suspend registration of these rodenticides, anticoagulants. And right now they have voted to do a third-party evaluation of the safety of these chemicals, but they haven't voted yet to suspend. Not every layperson should write the pesticide board, I think, but I do think if there's any organizations, especially if they have any kind of it can even be a peripheral relation to this issue. Again, like if it's an animal rescue, even a pet rescue, that maybe they've had an animal that's been sick with rat poisoning. Any Save Wildlife or Rescue Raptor group. If you are a vet or a vet tech or a wildlife rehabber, please consider writing to the pesticide board and use any anecdotes you may have about cases that you have had to intake with this issue. And I do think it helps to call or write the governor's office and tell them you've been paying attention to this petition and that you would like to see these anticoagulants suspended. I want to talk a little bit, and I'm just going to pause for a second because I've got more people who want to come in. Okay. So a little bit about home rule petitions and public lands bans. So as I mentioned before, in 2022, Arlington became the first municipality to both ban eschars on its public properties, and it submitted a home rule petition to ban on private property as well. And that is because the state does not allow any municipality or so any town or city the right to ban any pesticide, not just rat poisons, on private property without special permission. And the process is you have to submit a home rule petition. Since Arlington's done this, and my numbers might be slightly off, but I think 8 other municipalities have codified public bans on anticoagulants, either the SCARs or both the first and second generation. And I think 6 others so far have submitted home rule petitions to the state. Now, some other places, some other municipalities may have adopted a policy to not use SCARs, but they haven't codified a ban, which is a little different. And I know at least 4 other communities are confirmed to be seeking a home rule petition at the upcoming town meeting season this spring. There may be more, but those are the ones that I've been in touch with that I know have confirmed to me that they are seeking that. And so what I think we need to do, everything that I basically wrote about the state can be applied here as well, which is like, you want to talk to your town meeting members or your city councilors. You want to call them rather than email them if possible, as these things are coming up for a vote. Other things that you can do on the municipal level, besides codifying a public lands ban or passing a home rule petition, is one thing that a lot of people don't realize is whenever there's new construction in a town or a city, most of the times they have to go through the Board of Health or the Department of Public Works to get a permit. And most of the times, like 9 out of 10 times, the Board of Health or the Department of Public Works will require that they have a pest management plan during construction for when they demolish the area. And even though those pest management plans don't clarify that they have to use poison, a lot of times they do. And in particular, some municipalities, and Arlington was included in this, required bait stations. And what I found by filing public records requests is that requiring bait stations incentivized the use of poison. And I think 30 out of 32 of the construction projects that was greenlit in 2021 in Arlington had SCARs in them, even though I think all but one of them had no activity, because they also have to assess the property to see if there's rodent burrows, to see if there's rodents. So it wasn't like there was a rodent problem. They were just putting these poisons down. And so I made a big deal about it. I wrote about it as a journalist. I got the press to cover it. And Arlington actually then stopped using any poison or bait stations with construction. So that's another mechanism you can put. It's not something that you're going to get, even with codifying a public lands ban, you have to do that separately, but that's another thing you can advocate for. And another thing you can advocate for is housing authorities. Every municipality has a housing authority. It's not, but it's not a municipal agency directed. So again, a public lands ban is not going to cover it. So you have to go separately with the housing authority. These are hundreds of properties. Hundreds of units, and often from the public records requests I've filed in the Boston metro area, most of these housing authorities are using hundreds of bait stations at their property. So you can go to that housing authority. They have a board, they have monthly meetings, they elect their board members, and you can make this an issue. And we did this in Arlington. We got them to stop using anticoagulants in their bait stations because one of their properties was directly abutting the cemetery where eagles were nesting and died of rat poison. Again, I'm just going to admit a few more people who are coming in, and then I'll continue. Okay. And briefly, there are other types of local warrants that you can also pursue, not just rodenticides, even though this is mostly going to be tackling this. Some things that I've worked on, either, again, as a supporter or I've been a direct proponent of, is like we've worked here in Arlington to ban single-use plastic bags and polystyrene containers, gas-powered leaf blowers. I worked last year to prohibit the sale of products that contain animal fur, and Arlington is the 8th municipality to do that. And so that was actually done through Save Arlington Wildlife. And the other thing we worked on was to prohibit the sale of pets. In Arlington, we weren't currently doing it, but we do have a Petco, and so I wanted to have that ban in place. And we were the first municipality to expand our pet sale ban to all animals, not just cats and dogs and rabbits, but to birds, reptiles, and fish. The reason I'm bringing this up is because even though this is not rodenticide specific, a lot of this is certain methods and tactics that I employed here I feel are really helpful for rodenticides. For instance, with the pet sale ban, I really looked at the argument besides just the animal welfare one, like the environmental toll of pet mills and animals that are bought from pet stores that are released into the outdoor environment and impact our native species. So there's a lot of other lessons you can learn about how you can build a network of different people who are interested in this. So a successful strategy for working on the municipal level, and again, a lot of this can be pulled into state level work as well, is to build a really diverse network of support. So for instance, when we were working on, well, even the plastic bag ban, but even more recently, the rodenticide bill, we got Sustainable Arlington to write a letter of support. We got the Conservation Commission to write a letter of support. In fact, the Conservation Commission plainly outlined and adopted a guideline of their own that they would never allow anticoagulants on their properties that are under their governance. And I think that really helped by the time we got to the select board meeting to say, hey, one of your own agencies has admitted that this issue is a big problem. We also got some of the public health groups that are in the area. All of the friends of groups like Friends of Menotomy Rocks Park, Friends of Spy Pond Park, all of them wrote letters, as well as Mystic River Watershed Association, which is based in Arlington, but covers all the municipalities in the Mystic River Watershed. And I know Myra is willing to write a letter of support to any municipality in their watershed that's interested in pursuing, a municipal ban or home rule petition. And similarly, Charles River Watershed Association is willing to support any towns or cities in their watershed that is looking to do this on the municipal level. I think it's really important to know your opposition and have your rebuttals ready. In this case, it may be people from the pest control sector to a lesser extent, but I've seen it in some other municipalities. It wasn't really a problem here in Arlington. I know sometimes certain restaurants or businesses may be a little opposed. So you may want to know what their arguments are in favor and be ready. In Arlington, at our select board meeting for our Arlington home rule petition and ban, a member from the New England Pest Management Association showed up, and he was like the second to last person to testify. And I think he would have sunk the bill if we already didn't have such strong arguments. And also I had gotten an expert to testify, which you'll see in this bullet, that it's good to have an expert. I had a rodent ecologist that testified right before him. So she basically had preempted all his arguments. And she was also an IPM expert. And so that really helped. I think for towns, it's really important to know that select board support is pretty important. In my experience in Arlington, and it may be a little different in other towns, but I've heard that it's mostly the same. If you can get the select board to buy in, that's a big part of the battle. And usually town meeting won't contradict the select board. I mean, it happens occasionally, but it's pretty rare. And especially if you can get either unanimous support from the select board or an overwhelming support, so say 4 out of 5 vote in favor of your bills, that is really, I think, going to push you over the finish line once it goes to town meeting. So I'd really work on your relationships or talking to select board members. City councils are different for cities. In cities, my understanding is usually a citizen can't file a bill. It has to be an ordinance filed by a city councilor. So I think then it really helps to have a really strong champion who's really going to push this through and curries a lot of favor with the city council. And I think that goes a long way. The first city that banned eschars on its public properties was Newton, and their city councilor is also the head of the Charles River Watershed Association. So I think that went really far in pushing that over, and it passed unanimously in all the chambers and then with the council and became law very quickly. I know that's not going to be the case every place, but I do think that really helps. So now on the smaller level, getting businesses and buildings to go poison free. So I take this with a grain of salt because unfortunately, I feel like there's not a lot of laws of transparency. I'm going to talk about what I did in Arlington that I think helped. One is I did a poison-free pledge campaign, and I had, as you can see in the bottom of that screen, I had an artist make up this placard that I would give businesses that weren't using poisons. And I actually started, and I'm going to have to admit a few more people, I actually started with the places that I knew weren't using poison. So rather than start with the hard battle of right away fighting those places that I knew were going to fight me about giving up poison, I went to the businesses I had good relationships. They didn't have any bait stations. They weren't using any products. And I said, do you want this? And the reason why I did that is because then people start seeing these around town. They're like, oh, what's this about? It raised awareness, and it fostered a little bit of competition too, where other businesses then got a hold of me too and were interested. There's a really good study that shows that people are really like sometimes buoyed by competition, like, oh, that person got a gold star, I want a gold star too. So that was where I started first, is like those low-hanging fruit targets, not using poison, or those that I had an angle that I could appeal to. So for instance, a group that already had an environmental mission, or it's a nonprofit that has a lot of like donors, or it really needs the goodwill of the public. So I could appeal to that in trying to get them to give up poisons. I have to admit more people. So for instance, one example is the New England Aquarium. I just want to ask people to mute if they haven't, because I think there's some feedback. So the New England Aquarium, I found out they were using bait stations. Actually, Marcy of Save Lexington Wildlife was the first person who discovered that. And then I was there a couple of months later, they were still using it. So we did a petition eventually, and we didn't even get a lot of signatures, I think about 300, 350. But I also had people follow up and email and call them. So I think they got hundreds of phone calls in like a 2-week period of time. And that's another thing. I always ask people, follow up with petitions or emails. Those phone calls make a big difference. And they gave it up because it didn't look good to have like an organization that's supposed to be about conservation using these poisons. My own former landlord was the Housing Corporation of Arlington, and they're a nonprofit. So we really started getting them a lot of media attention that they were using these poisons. We did an open petition. We had like 500 signatures in a week or two, got a lot of media to write up about it. And they did eventually give it up, but it took months, but they did eventually give it up. So that's, again, why you want to choose your battles, because sometimes these can be months long. And you want to be, I think, judicial with your time, because you can burn out. We did a lot of letters to the editors, and not just on what businesses were using this, also on the issue in general. Like when our first bald eagle died, we flooded Arlington Advocate with so many letters to the editor. They had to spread it out over several weeks to get them all in. And even when they stopped doing their letters to the editor, we flooded them with so many. They then did a cover story on, it was actually about the Housing Corporation of Arlington, but also some recent deaths with the owls in our town. Another thing to consider besides petitions and open letters is, some top-down approaches to streamline for efficiency. So go to your Chamber of Commerce for your town or city and ask if you can write something for their newsletter on this issue, or do a presentation, because they're the ones that actually have a lot of businesses and even some residential landlords as their members. And you can get a captive audience there about this. And so that might allow you to, in a much quicker time, get access to more of these businesses. And sometimes certain squares or plazas have their own business association, so you can go through that rather than piecemeal going from business to business to business. And that is just a quick screenshot of like, we didn't even hit 340 signatures before the New England Aquarium said they had stopped using the baits, and then they took all the bait stations away. I was surprised that they didn't just stop using escars. They said they just decided to get rid of all bait stations. If anyone goes to the aquarium and sees those bait stations again, let me know. Protest is also a very powerful way to get attention. Similar to petitioning businesses, I feel like the bigger part that plays is it helps like raise a lot of public awareness and helps galvanize action, and that can also eventually snowball into, laws being changed. But in the interim, if you can get those businesses or other places to give up, that's good too. We're in like a 2-year protest, like 2-year campaign with Whole Foods, and we did do some protests a couple of years ago. And I think Marcy from Save Lexington Wildlife is going to help organize some more now that we've had a recent wildlife death. And that's why we're picking it back up again, right? Because now there's been a wildlife death on the property. It's been confirmed they're using the poisons, which they never stopped, but it's been confirmed that they're using it throughout most of their stores. And, so we have more data. We've had recent incidences of broken open bait stations. So we have something to go with to really utilize there too. I do think it's important, and I'm just about to wrap up and we'll go to questions, to vet claims about not using poison, and to be careful with that, because I've found out the hard way in like the years of doing this that a lot of times people or like businesses will say they're not using poison, and they are. And it's hard sometimes to vet those claims, because the labeling law isn't great either. Like the labeling law is really strange. Like a place can't label with saying that the bait station contains something it doesn't, but they can just not have a label at all. So a lot of times they can say, there'll be an unlabeled bait station. They can say, oh, those have snap traps in them, or those have some other product, or those have fertility control in them. Housing Corporation of Arlington actually did that with us, and I was skeptical. They said snap traps, and I lived there, and I never saw anyone emptying snap traps. Just for people who may not know, if you put snap traps in, you have to check those every week and empty them, or they don't work, because obviously they'll fill up. It'll be a public health hazard if there's rotting carcasses. So I was always on my property, and my window looked right out to the parking lot, and I never saw them come every week. I saw them come once a month and like sneak put stuff in the bait stations. But finally someone went out there and found out for sure that they were still using poisons. But that whole time they had just peeled the labels off. So you want to really see if you can vet it. And if you can't, it's sort of a judgment call whether you want to keep pushing it, but I would definitely not go by their word. The thing I have asked is I've said, even if it's snap traps, to put a label saying snap traps. And I actually got Stonehurst in Waltham to do that, because again, that is a federal violation. So I would be more likely to believe them if they actually have a label saying what they have and it says that. Another thing you could do is you could ask either to be present when they're stocking the bait stations to see what they're putting in, or you can ask for a copy of the pesticide contract, and you could say you could redact the price, but I'd like to see what the product is. And you can do that for public lands. You can do a public lands request. That's actually what I did with Stonehurst, because they're technically under the city of Waltham's property. I did a public records request also to make sure that it was snap traps, and that was on their contract. And that's basically it for now. I'm just showing you a couple of slides of some ways we worked to get success on like media attention. Like I had a state house at the rally during like the environmental committee hearing in 2023. So only about 2 months after MK the Eagle died, and several media outlets covered it. I really think it also helped change the conversation to looking more at prohibiting escars, because I think a lot of the conversation at the State House was about just tracking it, and also the role towns and cities can play in regulating pesticides, because we were also very interested again in getting more municipal control over these. And then eventually that rally led to a top page editorial in the Boston Globe, because a Boston Globe editorial board member was there and saw the rally. And it took months. Like that rally was in early May, and they published this editorial 4th of July weekend. So it took almost 3 months, but he never forgot the rally. And he wrote me in June to say, I want to write an editorial on this. So also don't doubt that like media can come in for something, you know, sometimes a couple of months later for events.